Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your back porch professor. I hope you're all having a wonderful and beautiful weekend, but I can certainly tell you who's not. And that's the so-called Maryland man, the Maryland father, the upstanding citizen who just so happens to be here in this country illegally. And that's one Kilmar Garcia. Now, what happens when you and your lawyers, and by the way, who the heck is paying for Garcia's legal bills? We need to do an investigation into that. That's our next video, I think. But regardless, what happens when you and your lawyers repeatedly reject deportation to 22 different countries? You end up somewhere so obscure, even your lawyers had to Google it. This is the insane story of how one man's legal chess game backfired spectacularly, and left-wing liberals are having an absolute meltdown over this. I'm sure you're all familiar by now with Kilmar Garcia. This is the fellow who entered our country illegally back in 2012 when he was 16, and he's been here ever since in the state of Maryland. He was arrested back in October 2019 at a Hyattsville Home Depot for loitering and suspicion of gang activity because he was hanging out with MS-13 gang members. He was identified as an MS-13 gang member based on paraphernalia on his body, clothing, symbols, tattoos, as well as an informant and a police officer who claimed he recognized Garcia as a bona fide member of MS-13. Regardless, let this be a lesson to you. If you're here illegally, you probably don't want to be hanging out with gang members, and you definitely don't want to get arrested if you do. And you probably shouldn't be coming here illegally in the first place. Well, so Garcia ended up in front of an immigration judge in Baltimore who issued a ruling that found that Garcia was technically removable from the country, meaning he should be deported because he entered here illegally. But that same judge, if you recall, he ordered what's called a withholding of removal specifically from the country of El Salvador. In other words, and again, this is absolutely incontrovertible. Even NPR is admitting this, okay? The judge's order, again, this back in 2019, the judge's order confirmed that Garcia could indeed be deported from the country, but he could not be sent back to his native El Salvador. And this is because the judge at the time, he was convinced that Garcia would face threats of gang retribution, were he to be deported to a Salvadoran jail. Now, for whatever reason, ICE at the time did not pursue a third country option. So third countries or nations had agreed to take in deportees who can't be sent back to their country of origin. So instead, ICE agents released Garcia from custody. If you can believe it, he ended up getting a work permit from the Department of Homeland Security, but he was required to check in with ICE annually, which he consistently did until March of 2025, when he was pulled over to the side of the road by ICE officers who informed him that his immigration status had changed. And that's when he was eventually deported to El Salvador. He was rounded up in a mass MS-13 deportation operation. And that is when the Maryland man myth was concocted. The Democrats and their mouthpieces in the legacy media teamed up to try to make it look like Trump was deporting an American citizen. So, a person who has every legal right to be here, which of course was not true. Garcia was 100% illegal and had deportation orders on him to boot. That's exactly what this 2019 Baltimore court decided. It was just he couldn't be legally deported to El Salvador. That was the only condition. So ever since the Trump administration's brought him back to the country, the Democrats and legacy media have been doing everything they possibly can to get him to stay here and make this look like a massive loss for Trump. But Trump's deportation machine has remained completely undeterred. It's kicked into high gear. Garcia has once again been put into immigration custody in Baltimore. And his lawyers tried to get creative, but perhaps too creative. They submitted a list of 22 countries where Garcia claimed he would face persecution or torture. And these included Uganda, Mexico, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Panama, Brazil, I mean, practically half of Latin America. And the strategy here was to make deportation so complicated that it wouldn't happen, just like back in 2019. Plot twist, ICE called their bluff. ICE called their bluff. This isn't 2019 anymore. The Department of Homeland Security turned down his persecution claim and instead notified Garcia that a new country had agreed to take him in. The country of Eswatini, Africa. Eswatini. Now, if you're asking the question, where the heck is Eswatini? You are not alone. In fact, it's being reported that Garcia's lawyers had to do a Google search to find out where their client was being deported. It's a landlocked nation in Africa. It's smaller than New Jersey. And it's actually ruled by an absolute African monarch. 32% of the population lives below the poverty line. The prison conditions are abysmal. They involve overcrowding, poor nutrition, lack of essential medication. Political prisoners often face torture and denial of basic rights like food. And the justice system, I mean, it's been described as fundamentally compromised, kind of like DC's justice system. Now, the irony is that Garcia could have chosen Costa Rica or Brazil or Mexico. He could have at least ended up in the same hemisphere. But because this guy decided to try to become a hero for the woke political left in our country, he's now facing life, literally life, in an African nation most people on the planet have never heard of. So we're discovering three huge takeaways in all of this. First, the legal strategy of trying to be the next big hero for the Democrats can backfire spectacularly. What seemed like smart lawyering ended up becoming a trap. Second, we're now learning that the Trump administration has quietly built up a massive global deportation network that could send people to countries they've never even seen. They don't speak the language of and have zero connection to. So Trump wasn't kidding about enacting the single largest mass deportation effort ever witnessed in our nation's history. And third, the whole due process defense for Garcia, it collapsed once the Trump administration rolled out different standards for alleged gang members because they are now designated terrorists. Traditional constitutional protections don't necessarily apply. And even with that said, it doesn't matter either way for Garcia because he already had his due process back in 2019 in that Baltimore court that issued the original deportation order. We have been saying from the very beginning of all of this for months now, the Democrats and the legacy media are going to lose this. Garcia is going to be deported. The question is not a matter of if or when. Now, it's only where. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to read your comments. And as always, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button for breaking news and analysis you're not going to hear anywhere else. God bless, guys. Enjoy your weekend.